very important and timely briefing on rising violence against minorities in India. As Safa mentioned, I'm with an organization called Hindus for Human Rights, where I serve as the Advocacy Director. And in this current moment in Indian politics and society, when we are seeing widespread forms of violence in so many different parts of India, inflicted by an ideology which believes that Indian identity should be synonymous with Hindu identity, this ideology of Hindu nationalism. We believe it's important to stand up as Hindus from across the world, from the diaspora as well as in India, and raise our voices against this ideology of hate, which is coming from our own community. My fellow panelists have shared in detail several different incidents and troubling sort of occurrences which are taking place in India in recent weeks. I want to hone in on one example which was mentioned by Mr. Ahmed a little bit earlier, and that's this attack on a man named Bhawanlal Jain. Bhawanlal Jain was a 65-year-old man from northern India. He belonged to the Jain community, which is a very small religious minority in India. A few weeks ago, he was sitting on a bench in the state of Madhya Pradesh, in the district of Neemuch. He had just visited a religious event in the neighboring state of Rajasthan. He was returning back to his own village when he lost his way and ended up in a similar sounding village in this district. And while he was sitting on this bench, a Hindu man named Dinesh Kushwaha came over to him, asking if he was a Muslim. Dinesh was the husband of a local BJP leader, the party which is ruling India at the present moment. And Bhawanlal Jain was mentally disabled. He had some disabilities and was struggling to answer that question. And in response, this husband of the BJP leader started physically assaulting him. And he actually handed over his phone to a kid on the street and asked him to record what was going on. And the videos that have been released on social media show that this Hindu extremist man was assaulting this 65-year-old elderly Jain man, asking if his name was Muhammad, asking him to show his government ID card to prove, was he Muslim or not. And through all of this, he was physically assaulting him just on the suspicion that he was a Muslim. Eventually, Bhawanlal was beaten to death and then died of his injuries. In this incident, the perpetrator, Dinesh Kushwaha, was arrested by local law enforcement, but we know of so many other incidents across India taking place in very recent times where the police are actually complicit in attacks on Muslims and other religious minorities, or turning a blind eye to the sort of extremist violence against marginalized communities. And so what we see today and what this incident of Bhawanlal Jain's death tells us is that India has become a country not only where Muslims, Dalits, Christians, marginalized communities are targeted by lynchings and hate mobs, but where anyone can be killed on the suspicion of being Muslim. And that's something that we should be just speechless by. I mean, it's a new degree of hate and otherization that has taken place, dehumanization of the Muslim community, where innocent people can now be targeted just for being perceived to be connected to this community. And that's very similar to what we are seeing where Mr. Ahmed was sharing about this new wave of litigation and popular discourse talking about medieval mosques in India, and even monuments like the Taj Mahal, this imagined historical narrative in which these symbols of Muslim identity and history across India are now being seen as monuments that were built over temples or were built using the materials from destroyed temples. We see in the Gyanvapi Mosque, where allegedly a Shivalinga was discovered in the mosque premises, and that gives a green light to take action, which we saw in 1992 with the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And so we're seeing across India these medieval monuments like the Taj Mahal or mosques like Gyanvapi Mosque or the Shahi Idgah Mosque in Mathura are similar kind of flashpoints for this imagined historical narrative of Hindu oppression and Muslims sort of destroying what is perceived to be a Hindu culture, a Hindu civilization. And all of these are just like Dinesh Kushwaha imagined that Bhamarlal Jain was a Muslim. These historical narratives are similarly imagined. We know that there's no historical proof for the Taj Mahal being a Hindu temple called Tejo Mahalaya, or so many of the other kind of conspiracy theories. But sadly, the dehumanization of the Muslim community has reached such a point where putting out a counter narrative is simply, its degree of hate and misinformation is overwhelming. But that's not to say that all hope is lost. I just want to share a little bit from our own work as an organization. In the last month, and just about a month ago, we released a statement in the Indian Express and several other Indian newspapers featuring dozens and dozens of Hindu religious leaders and temples endorsing a statement condemning anti-Muslim violence in India. We got signatures from Hindu leaders and temples from 6 different countries around the world, including several in India. And so what we need today is to see more and more Hindu leaders from our community speaking out and countering this sort of hate, violence, and dehumanization. And then the other point, of course, that my fellow speakers have been sharing is the role of the United States, because we're, all of us are sitting here in the US. A lot of our work engages in advocacy with our US government partners and elected officials. And as many of my fellow panelists have noted, the US-India partnership is only getting stronger and stronger in recent years. And for many good reasons. I would say that all of us on this briefing and all of our co-sponsoring organizations, we want to see a strong, thriving US-India partnership. We believe that there are, at the end of the day, there have to be these shared democratic values, whether it's the Indian Constitution, which is very much under attack today, and the United States Constitution and structure as democracies. But if India is becoming more and more undemocratic, sliding away from these constitutionally guaranteed freedoms, then it's the responsibility of other democratic partners, such as the United States, to not shy away or turn a blind eye, but to actually address these issues head on. This is the anniversary today of June 1st, is the anniversary of the publication of an important text called Gulamgiri, or slavery. It was written in 1873 by the anti-caste activist Jyotiba Phule. This is a text that was dedicated by Jyotiba Phule to, and I quote, "the good people of the United States as a token of admiration for their sublime, disinterested, and self-sacrificing work in the cause of slavery." So Jyotiba Phule in 1873 dedicated his anti-caste text to the people of the United States who worked to abolish slavery around the time of the Civil War. And decades later, we saw that American civil rights activists, such as Martin Luther King Jr., turned to India to learn tactics and strategies for civil disobedience and enacting social change. And so there's a long history of solidarity, of shared principles of social justice and liberation for all that exist within our own history as Indian Americans, Indians, and Americans. And today, so as the US-India partnership is growing stronger and stronger, we need to look back at that history of social justice and solidarity. And as India is becoming increasingly violent and unstable, we need our elected officials, we need our administration right now to raise these issues again. It's time for the United States, whether it's the Biden administration, the State Department, members of Congress, we know that the Indian government is paying attention to what the world says about it. And so these sort of incidents may seem like one-off, it's a so-called fringe incident, or it's taken care of by local law enforcement, but they keep happening. And there is a consistently documented pattern of hate and violence in India that is taking it away from being a liberal democracy where pluralism, civil rights, and human rights are guaranteed for all. And so today, our ask for the United States government and any policymakers who are watching this briefing is to look at what your own government agencies are saying about India, whether it's the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, the State Department's annual human rights reports. There's a strong consensus that India is going farther and farther from being a democratic country where rights of minorities are guaranteed. And it's time for everyone to wake up and take a more proactive role in challenging this injustice.